Welcome to part 2 of the 1L's Introduction to the Bluebook. This is part 2, Guide to the Bluebook. So citation manuals are reference tools, just like dictionaries and other types of reference tools, encyclopedias. And so the Bluebook is a substantial manual, and it is filled with a lot of very detailed rules and examples, and it can seem overwhelming. But the practical reality is that you won't need to use every rule in the manual, and even the rules that you do use, you don't need to memorize them, although you are going to memorize some of the more frequently used parts of the Bluebook. The goal is to become familiar with the structure so that you can use the Bluebook and look things up when you need them. And that's on par with everything that legal professionals do. We have a grounding in the law and in legal research and citation, but we don't have to know every aspect of it at all times, but we do have to know where to find things. And so the purpose of the citation exercises in the ICW is to get you familiar with the Bluebook and how it works, and to get you really familiar with the rules you're going to use the most, and then to just introduce you to the structure of the Bluebook so that you can use it to look things up when you run across new situations that you don't know off the top of your head. The Bluebook structure, particularly the parts that you'll use, are pretty simple. There's the introduction, which gives a general overview and a structural explanation, and it's good to go ahead and read that before you get started learning Bluebook citation. And then there are some sections that you're going to use a lot, and so it's worth tabbing those in some way with Post-it flags or some kind of more permanent tabs. So you want to tab the blue pages, but in particular, mostly what you're going to use is B10 and the surrounding rules. So I usually recommend just tabbing B10 so that you don't have your book sort of over-tabbed. Then in the white pages rules, I recommend tabbing rules 10, 12, 15, and 18. 10 is the rule for cases, 12 is the rule for statutes, 15, 16, and 17 are the rules for print secondary sources, and 18 is the rule for online sources. And so if you'll just tab the beginning of each of those rules or those sections in the Bluebook, you'll be able to find what you need pretty easily. The tables that you'll use the most often are T1 and T6. T1 is a jurisdictional table, and T6 is a table of abbreviations. And a lot of what you'll do with citations is abbreviate longer words so that they don't interrupt the writing that the citations are within. So you'll be a frequent flyer with table 6. And then the index. I recommend tabbing the beginning. It's just an alphabetic reference guide, and that's a good idea anytime you're stuck, rather than struggle unnecessarily. Look up whatever you're searching for in the index, and it'll take you right to there within the Bluebook. So the introduction section has an orientation to legal citation, it has a structural guide, and then it has edition updates. And so this is the first edition of the Bluebook that you're familiar with, but they come out about every 5 years. And so every time there's a new Bluebook, the Bluebook authors will put updates in the introduction explaining what has changed since the last edition. So that's always handy to read when you get a new edition of the Bluebook. So the blue pages are the first section that you'll use, and the blue pages are sort of a mini Bluebook specifically for practitioners. The Bluebook was originally written for scholars to cite legal works, but then it became adopted by practitioners. At the time that happened, practitioners were primarily creating things on typewriters, while scholars were writing things that were published with printing presses. And so there were more options for typeface in the scholarly works because the printing presses had more options than typewriters did. And so for some reason, that distinction between practitioner works and scholarly works has persisted within the Bluebook, and there's really no reason for it anymore, since everything is really created originally on a desktop or a laptop computer that has the same capabilities, whether you're creating an entire 1,000-page tome or a law review article or a motion to be filed in state district court. So that's what the blue pages are for. They show the differences between scholarly works and practitioner works. Practitioner works are the ones that you're learning to produce in your first year legal writing course. If some of you go on to serve on the staff of one of your school's journals, or you become a law professor, then you will use the white pages more. But for practitioner works, most of what you need is in the blue pages, although there's some additional detail in the white pages that you'll become familiar with. And so in addition to those typeface conventions, again, the blue pages collect some of the most frequently used rules so that you can mostly rely on the blue pages, even though you'll have to become familiar with the white pages for specific situations. The main rules that are in the white pages provide examples for scholarly works, which mean that the typeface conventions that you're going to see in the white pages are the typeface conventions that are used for scholarly work. So for example, in a law review article, a case name is not italicized, but in a practitioner document, it is italicized. So the examples that you're going to see in the blue pages have the case names italicized. The examples that you're going to see in the white pages do not have the case names italicized, and that's why. It doesn't mean that you don't italicize them when you're writing practitioner works. Another kind of stark difference between scholarly and practitioner works is that for statutes and secondary sources, much of those citations are drafted in large and small caps for scholarly works, but they are drafted in ordinary Roman type for practitioner work. So you don't use the large and small caps for practitioner works. So in the chapters for constitutions and statutes, or the rules rather, that's 11 and 12, and then the ones for secondary sources in 15, 16, and 17, you'll see the examples with a lot of large and small caps in the white pages, but you're not going to use that because you'll be drafting those same citations for scholarly work, so you'll use ordinary Roman type, and that's how you'll see the examples in the blue pages. So the essential blue pages sections that you'll need are in B10, B10.1.1, B10.1.2, B10.1.3, and B10.2. Each rule in the blue pages is relatively short, so if you'll just tab B10, you'll get to B12 pretty easily just flipping a few pages. The parts of B12 that you'll use the most are B12.1.1, B12.1.2, and B12.2. Additional blue pages coverage that you might be interested in: B11, B15 and 16 are secondary sources, B17 is court and litigation documents, B18 is internet sources, B5 is quotations and block quotations, and B1, 2, and 6 give you formatting guidelines. B1 gives you the basic format for a citation, when to use citation clauses versus citation sentences. It also, in B2, you get typeface conventions, and for the most part, you'll only use ordinary Roman type or italics, and so it tells you when to use each. And then B6 gives you spacing rules that you will use for abbreviations. The white pages, or the detailed rules sections, break down into generally 4 categories that you'll use the most often. Rules 1 through 9 will give you the foundation, and those are general information for citations that you'll use across all sections and all types of sources. So it covers capitalization, signals, quotations, and some formatting principles. Rules 10 through 12 cover primary sources, 15 through 17 are secondary sources, and Rule 18 covers electronic sources. The back of the blue book, you'll notice, returns to some blue pages you can see from looking at a profile of the book, and those contain the tables, which are sort of a reference section within the reference manual. The ones you'll use the most often are Table 1, which has jurisdictional information, and Table 6, which contains case name and journal abbreviations. So within Table 1, the jurisdictional information, it will give you the court structure, court names, reporter systems, and statutory compilations for the federal system and for each of the 50 states, as well as things like territories and a few foreign jurisdictions. And so Table 1 is particularly useful because it not only gives you information you need for citations, but if you need information about, for example, what the statutory compilation is called for a particular state that you need to do research in, you can find that information in T1. And then finally, there's the index. And so to use the index effectively, you know that it's just a standard index. It's an alphabetical listing of all the topics that are covered within the Bluebook. It has a color-coded system. So if the entry in the index is in black print, that tells you that it's directing you to rule text or an explanation. If the entry is in blue text, that means there is a specific example that you can look at of whatever that rule is. So anytime you're not sure, you can go ahead and check out that index. Again, this PowerPoint has added an additional word out for reasons passing understanding. So you want to use the index anytime you're confused. There's no need to struggle needlessly. It's a well done index, and it'll get you where you need to go if you don't know exactly where a particular rule is.